Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the channel. And today I'm going to give my review of the Great American Bash 1990. Starting off the evening, we'll go to our first match of the night. It is Buddy Landel versus Brian Pillman. Thought it was a good opening matchup for the Great American Bash 1990. Back and forth matchup between Landel and Pillman. Landel and Pillman both exchanged in the middle of the ring, but Landel was keeping the pace of the match. Pillman ultimately hits a crossbody off the top rope on Landel, pins him for the 3. And your winner of the match is Brian Pillman. Hats off to Brian Pillman for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night as well. It is Mike Rotunda versus the Iron Sheik. I thought this was an okay matchup. Back and forth matchup between Rotunda and the Sheik, with the Sheik keeping the pace of the match. Rotunda and Iron Sheik both exchange in the middle of the ring, but Rotunda ultimately hits a roll-up on the Iron Sheik, pins him for the 3. And your winner of the match is Mike Rotunda. Hats off to Mike Rotunda for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night as well. It is Doug Furnas versus Dutch Mantell. I thought it was an okay matchup. Back and forth matchup between Furnas and Mantell. Furnas hits a devastating press slam on Mantell. Furnas was keeping the pace of the match. Furnas and Mantell both exchange in the middle of the ring. Furnas hits a power slam on Dutch Mantell. Furnas hits a belly-to-belly suplex on Dutch Mantell, pins him for the 3, and your winner of the match is Doug Furnas. Hats off to Doug Furnas for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Harley Race versus Tommy Rich. I thought this was a good match. Back and forth matchup between Harley Race and Tommy Rich, with Harley keeping the pace of the match. Harley Race hits a pile driver on Tommy Rich. Harley then hits a knee drop on Tommy Rich as well. Tommy then goes for a crossbody, but Harley Race ends up countering it into a roll-up, pins for the 3, and your winner of the match is Harley Race. Hats off to Harley Race for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is for the NWA United States Tag Team Championships. It is the Midnight Express versus the Southern Boys. I thought it was a good matchup. Back and forth matchup between the Midnight Express and the Southern Boys, with the Southern Boys keeping the pace of the match. Bobby Eaton hits a devastating leg drop off the top rope on Tracy Smothers. Stan Lane then kicks Smothers. Eaton then hits a roll-up, pins for the 3, and your winners of the match, and at that time, still NWA United States Tag Team Champions, are the Midnight Express. Hats off to the Midnight Express for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Z-Man versus Vader. This was a glorified squash match. This was also Vader's pay-per-view debut, or WCW debut, if you will, for the promotion at the time. The match itself was a glorified squash match. Vader was keeping the pace throughout the entire match. Vader hits a press slam on the Z-Man, and then Vader ultimately hits a devastating splash on the Z-Man, pins him for the 3, and your winner of the match is Vader. Hats off to Vader for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is the Freebirds versus the Steiner Brothers. I thought this was a relatively good matchup. Back and forth matchup between both teams. Rick hits a power slam on Michael P.S. Hayes. Steiners were keeping the pace of the match. Freebirds hit a double suplex on Rick on the outside. Scott then hits a power slam on Michael Hayes. Scott then hits a Frankensteiner on Hayes as well. Garvin then hits a DDT on Scott, but Rick hits a belly-to-belly suplex, pins for the 3, and your winners of the match are the Steiner Brothers. Hats off to the Steiner Brothers for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is the Four Horsemen versus El Gigante, Junkyard Dog, and Paul Orndorff. I thought it was an okay matchup. Back and forth matchup between both teams, with El Gigante, Junkyard Dog, and Orndorff keeping the pace of the match. Sid hits a devastating power slam on Paul Orndorff, but this match ultimately ends in a double disqualification. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is for the NWA United States Heavyweight Championship. It is Lex Luger versus Mean Mark. I thought it was a good matchup. Back and forth matchup between Luger and Mean Mark, with Mean Mark keeping the pace of the match. Lex puts Mark into a torture rack. Referee is out. Paul E. Dangerously then attacks Lex Luger, but Lex gets up, hits a clothesline on Mean Mark, pins him for the 3, And your winner of the match, and at that time, still NWA United States Heavyweight Champion, is Lex Luger. Hats off to Lex Luger for getting the win in that matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night as well. It is the Rock and Roll Express versus Doom for the WCW Tag Team Championships. The match itself was a good match. Back and forth matchup between both teams, with Doom keeping the pace of the match. Ron Simmons ultimately hits a shoulder tackle off the top rope. Pins for the 3. And your winners of the match, and at that time, still WCW Tag Team Champions, are Doom. Hats off to Doom for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is the main event of the Great American Bash 1990. It is Ric Flair defending the NWA World Heavyweight Championship against Sting. I thought this was a great match. Back and forth matchup between Flair and Sting, with Flair keeping the pace of the match. Flair and Sting both exchange in the middle of the ring. Flair goes for a figure 4, but Sting counters it with a roll-up, pins him for the 3, and your winner of the match, and at that time, new World Heavyweight Champion, is Sting. Hats off to Sting for getting the win in this matchup. A couple of things I'm going to say about the Great American Bash 1990, man, before I get out of here. Number one, this was a decent event. But the one thing I will take away from this pay-per-view is that it was extremely long. I feel like all in all, I think it was 11 to 12 matches in total. I feel like that's way too long for a pay-per-view, in my honest opinion. The other thing I want to get into is some of the matches on this card. There was a lot of matches on this card I could have done without. As far as being a fan, I mean, Buddy Landel versus Brian Pillman, I feel like it was lackluster. Mike Rotunda versus Iron Sheik. Now, I don't know why Iron Sheik was even wrestling at this time. I feel like they put this match together just for a mid-card matchup, but it just wasn't needed, and it was very lackluster. Doug Furnas versus Dutch Mantel, again, another lackluster match that went on way too long. Harley Race versus Tommy Rich was a solid matchup, but I feel like this was a time where Harley Race's in-ring career was coming to an end. The Z-Man versus Vader. I was happy that Vader, obviously debuted for WCW. He did a fantastic job. Not a big fan of the Z-Man. One of the other matches on here that surprised me, though, was the Midnight Express versus the Southern Boys. That was a really good matchup. It was great to see Tracy Smothers. Rest in peace to Tracy Smothers. But all in all, it was a really good tag team matchup. The other match that I wasn't really big on it, as far as watching it, was Four Horsemen versus El Gigante, Junkyard Dog, and Paul Orndorff, only due to the reason that the match ended in a double disqualification. And to be honest with you, when I was watching the match, El Gigante really didn't do anything. The Four Horsemen side of the team, you had Arn Anderson, you had Sid Vicious, and you had Barry Windham. And obviously they were trying to make it seem like El Gigante was a force to be reckoned with. But as far as in-ring ability, it just wasn't there. He did nothing in the match whatsoever. He just kind of scared the Four Horsemen. That was it. So I felt like that was lackluster. The NWA United States Heavyweight Championship match between Lex Luger and Mean Mark was also a relatively good matchup. But honestly, it's all about the main event, man. Ric Flair versus Sting, one of the two biggest rivals in professional wrestling. And this was Sting's night to win. And Sting ended up getting the win and picking up the victory and becoming the new World Heavyweight Champion. So again, hats off to Sting for getting the win in this matchup. As far as giving a rating for Great American Bash 1990, I'm going to give it a solid 6, man. Probably maybe a 6.5 at best, man. But this is my review of the Great American Bash 1990. I hope you guys are out there staying safe. Be careful. And remember, stay classic. Peace.